Good day everyone. For today's reporting, I'm going to report the informal assessment. And by the way, I am your reporter, Lim Mary from BEd 3C. To start with, let us first define what is informal assessment. An informal assessment is spontaneous. It is a method of evaluation where the instructor tests participant knowledge using no standard criteria or rubric. So as you can see, we already mentioned the word spontaneous evaluation and no standard criteria. So ano nga ba ang ibig sabihin kapag sinabi nating informal assessment is spontaneous? When we say informal assessment is spontaneous, that means that this kind of assessment can done impulse or unplanned. So there's no pre-planning na nagaganap unlike formal assessment. Sabi kasi sa previous report, the report before informal assessment, which is formal assessment, sinabi doon na ang formal daw ay isang systematic pre-planning. While ang informal naman ay isang spontaneous, kumbaga day-to-day observation and feedback. So nagpo-focus lang tayo on observation, on how students perform in class, and how much they know. So ina-evaluate natin ang isang student or ina-assess natin sila without using standard criteria or rubric. We are assessing the students in a different way unlike the formal assessment. Are we clear po ba sa tinatawag nating informal assessment? Always remember lang po na kapag sinabi nating informal assessment, it is a spontaneous method of evaluation with no standard rubric or criteria. So now that we already define what is informal assessment, let us now compare and contrast the two assessments so that we can differentiate them at mas lalo nating maintindihan. So in informal assessment, we have what we call pre-planning. So sinabi ko na nga kanina na ang formal assessment ay isang systematic pre-planning type of assessment. While in informal naman, it is spontaneous. Again, kapag sinabing spontaneous, it is unplanned assessment. Second, sa formal assessment, meron tayong tinatawag na standardized testing, while in informal assessment, non-standardized. So, there is no established or standard or kung tawagin natin certain grading criteria to evaluate the student. Halimbawa, sa standardized testing kasi, typically, yung student natin is nagre-respond lang to the same question under the same condition. Then the result, halimbawa yung test, the result nun will be used to grade them. While in informal assessment, we only focus into individual performance without using the rubric or the metric. So there's no standard testing in informal assessment. That's why we called it non-standardized. Third, informal assessment, scores are considered, while in informal assessment, no scores. Informal assessment, scores kasi is necessary since ayun yung nagiging source natin or pinagbabasehan natin to determine whether they learn or not. Diba? Sa scores tayo mabase how much they learn. While in informal, scores is unnecessary since we're not using any grading criteria, diba? We are only evaluating their progress at the different points. So, di tayo nagbabase sa mga scores na nagiging result as their performance. Then, fourth, informal assessment, scores are compared, while in informal assessment, no comparing to other students. So, sa formal, scores are compared. So, the teacher used to compare the performance of an individual student to the rest of the class. Example, kumbaga kunwari ako yung student. So, my scores will be compared to the scores of the rest of the students or the class. Scores ko is kinukumpara sa scores the rest of the students. While in informal naman, ang way of assessing naman ito is no comparing to others. Sa informal, we're only comparing the individual's work or performance from previous to present. Halimbawa, me as a student. So, yung present work ko or performance ko in present is i-compared lang ni teacher to my performance or work on the previous. Kumbaga, ang pinagko-compare lang ni teacher sa informal is my present and previous work. Individually yon. While sa formal naman, my scores compared to the rest of the class. So, bakit po ba natin need na compare? First, to know the extent of knowledge na nagain na ng ating mga students so far. And second, para malaman kung nagpa-progress ba sila or hindi. Then next, we have sa formal assessment, meron po tayong tinatawag na tests or different types of tests like summative tests. And in informal assessment, we have observing and interviewing. So, sa formal kasi, dumidepende tayo sa resulta ng test or exams ng mga students natin. While in informal, gaya ng nabanggit ko kanina, we are only observing since wala naman tayong pinagbabasihang standard grading. And isa pa, ang pinaka-purpose kasi ng informal is for simple feedback. So, from day-to-day observation ng teacher, pwede nating ma-identify o ma-define yung progress ng students natin, especially kung nag-excel na ba sila sa klase, kung may any improvements ba nangyayari, na-enhance ba yung skills nila, or consistent lang sila sa performance nila simula pa nung una. Then for the last one, sa formal assessment, typographical error, sa formal assessment, ano yan? Classroom environment like testing facilities. Sa informal assessment naman, meron tayong tinatawag na normal classroom environment lang. So, this type of assessment kasi can execute na in just a normal classroom environment lang. So, no need na for us to create a testing facilities just to assess the students. Then, yung informal assessment kasi, isa pa, it is very adjustable naman at easy to apply lang. So that we can evaluate the student from day-to-day class natin. So, yung normal arrangement of class lang natin is okay na to evaluate them. Hindi na natin kailangan mag-create or mag-effort pa na gumawa ng isang testing facilities for them to assess. So, sana po na-gets natin yung differences ng formal and informal assessment. Now, let's move on to the some examples of informal assessment. First, we have the jumbled letter. First example of informal assessment is quizzes. So, what is quizzes? This is the typical way students are evaluated for their acquisition of knowledge, usually consisting of elements such as multiple choice question, true or false questions, short answer questions, fill in the blank questions, and so on. So, just to clarify, since nabanggit ko kanina na formal is for test, most common sa test, yung quizzes and yung test is very different sa isa't isa. So, yung form kasi ng quizzes, pwede natin siyang gawin in a customize. So, kung ano yung gusto natin mag-goal, kung ano yung gusto natin ma-reach, kung gusto natin na in a fun way, so pwede natin ibahin yung types of quiz natin. I-customize natin. While yung test naman is more standardized, kaya mas common siya sa formal assessment. So, the quick quizzes improves class participation. So, isa ito sa mga evaluation method to know the student's knowledge about the topic. So, pwede natin siyang gamitin or gawin before the class discussion or after the instructor covers all the knowledge. So, pwedeng before or after the discussion. So, ano nga ba yung example ng quizzes question? So, I only cite two examples. First quiz question, how many continents are in the world? So, meron tayong choices na dalawa, which is A1 and B2. The second example is Australia and Africa are example of planet. Ang ating choices naman ay yes or no. So, sa quizzes natin, mapapansin nyo sa example, meron tayong tinatawag na dichotomous. Pag sinabi natin dichotomous quizzes or dichotomous question na ina-apply natin sa quizzes, ito yung type of question na nag-o-offer lang ng two possible answer. Maaring 1 and 2, yes or no, agree or disagree, true or false, or any choices, basta dalawa lang siya. Ayun yung tinatawag natin dichotomous. Or pwede rin naman tayong magkaroon ng quizzes na open-ended pero in a way na mabilis lang. So, sa open-ended, natakal naman natin at alam naman natin kung ano yung mga tinatawag nating open-ended, hindi po ba? So, sa open-ended question, ibig sabihin, yung mga students natin is pwedeng mag-respond in an open text format. So, expected na they can respond in a longer response at yung context nila is hindi nasasagot ng yes or no. So, opposite siya ng dichotomous. So, ano naman po yung mga advantages in using quizzes in a classroom assessment? We have two. First, because quizzes are fun and fast, students are more excited to take part in this process. So, dito, na-encourage natin yung mga students natin na mag-engage in quizzes or class discussion since it is fun and quick nga, diba? So, yung mga kina-customize natin quizzes is nakaka-attract sa mga students natin. Second, it exposes students to new subject area. So, yung quiz, pwede din natin siyang gamitin to introduce a new topic. Hindi po ba nasabi ko kanina na pwede natin siyang gamitin before or after the discussion. So, kung gagamitin natin siya before, pwedeng maging way siya para mag-introduce tayo ng bagong topic sa mga estudyante natin. At pwede rin namang para malaman natin yung prior knowledge nila or kung mayroon na ba silang idea about sa topic natin. So, in that way, nakakatch na natin yung interest nila ng paunti-unti. Of course, kung meron tayong advantages, we have disadvantages in using quizzes in a classroom assessment. First, quizzes are fast-paced and do not give room for detailed feedback. So, since quiz nga is quickie lang, so napaka-minimal lang ng time na nailalaan natin for quiz. So, exchanges lang siya ng question and answer. And there's no time or wala tayong room to become more detailed para i-elaborate natin yung mga bagay-bagay. Like for example, diba may tanong, tapos may choices. So, hindi na natin na ipapaliwanag bakit yun yung tamang sagot or hindi na natin na-expand yung tanong. Since quick quiz nga lang yung ginagawa natin. Second, it can demotivate students easily. So, quizzes can be fun. Yes, it can be fun, but sometimes yung quizzes, there are students talaga na really hate quizzes. So, yung moment na naririnig nila na may quiz na naman, so parang madali agad pumapasok sa utak nila na mahirap or baka wala silang idea about sa ipapa-quiz mo or baka bumaba yung scores nila or mahihirapan sila. So, parang gano'n. So, in that way is nade-demotivate agad yung mga students natin to take part with the quiz. Lalo na kung ginagawa natin yung quiz is hindi nakaka-attract sa mga students natin. So, that is the first example of informal assessment. Second, we have a jumbled letter and it is project. So, ano naman po ba yung project? A project is a school task requiring considerable effort. A school task performed by students to satisfy the teacher. So, this task naman, ito naman yung nagre-require sa mga students natin to use their knowledge in the classroom in engagement in the real world. Kumbaga, application na siya, diba? So, halimbawa, me as an instructor, or as a teacher, I can ask my student for a group project or individual project. So, sa group project, pwede ko silang sabihin na group yourself into 5. So, they are working with their peers or their group mates. While in individual project naman, in that way naman ay engage sila with the project independently. So, ano po ba yung mga example ng mga project? So, very familiar naman na po tayo dito since elementary until now is nagpapagawa pa rin naman po ng mga project yung mga teacher natin. So, example of a school project. First, ask a student to write a sample letter to the president inviting him for the presentation. So, ito ang unang example ng mga project na pwede natin ipagawa sa students natin. So, sa pagpapaproject, pwede tayong maglatag ng mga choices sa kanila or for our students. So, it can be written, it can be a performance, or depende sa type of projects na gusto ni teacher or depende sa goal na gustong mangyari ni teacher sa outcomes. So, pwedeng through writing yung project natin, which is the example number 1. Second naman, as students to grow a plant at home and bring it to school. Pwede naman performance, kung saan mag-effort sila to plant a tree. Siyempre, didiligan yun araw-araw para mag-grow. And then, ayun yung ipapresent nila kay teacher. Then, third, as students to do some charity work for the elderly in the community and share their experiences. Another performance project na naman to. As a teacher, you are asking them to take part in the community. Tapos, yung experiences nila is pwede na i-share sa klase na rin. It can be a presentation, orally, or pwede rin bigyan sila ng choices kung saan mas better or mas comfortable sila. Kung writing, pwede natin introduce sa kanila yung writing. Ano naman po ba advantages of a school project? As students engage in projects, they learn life skills outside of the classroom such as collaborations and communications. So, dito mas na-enhance yung communication skills nila and collaboration because they are working with their peers. Kapag groupings, diba? So, great way yon for interaction. Nabibuild dun yung good relationship nila between their peers. Second, it helps students to understand how their classroom knowledge fits into the real world. So, it is more on creativity and application na ng mga bagay na natutunan nila inside the classroom where they can use all the knowledge that the teacher taught and may apply nila yung mga skills na natutunan nila in creating their project or doing their project. Now, let's proceed to these advantages of school project. First, it is time-consuming and better suited for formal assessment. So, yung project, it can be a formal and informal assessment. Depende kung paano yun na-execute ni teacher. So, sabi it is time-consuming. Paano siya nagiging time-consuming? Because they need enough time para matapos or to create the task na inassign sa nila ni teacher. So, they need more time for planning and for the process to make the project. So, as sabi din nila, mas better daw ito or better suited for formal assessment. So, nangyayari naman yun because finished product na yung ibang project na pinapagawa ni teacher, di ba? So, nire-receive ni teacher yung project na yun as a finished product. So, wala siya masyadong idea about sa process on how they produce it. So, kailangan niya ngayong i-judge ang project fairly using the criteria for grading. So, familiar naman po siguro tayo sa grading criteria, di ba? So, meron tayong ilan sa mga naka-include sa criteria na yan is yung creativity, cleanliness, yung depende sa kung ano yung resulta or finished product na nagawa nyo as a project. So, dun dumidepende si teacher. Yun na yung pinaka-ginagrade niya, yung result na. And aside pa doon, it depende pa rin naman kung paano i-execute ni teacher yung project natin. So, it can be formal and informal. Second, a student may not have access to the resources needed for the project. So, some project talaga ay hindi madaling gawin because of the limited resources and access. Halimbawa na lang, kaya na lang kunwari kung ang project nyo is to create a sample of biography. So, syempre, kung gagawa tayo ng isang biography ng ibang tao, of course, we need other people na pwede natin ma-interview or makunan ng mga personal information, mga experiences para magawa natin yung isang biography. But some students is walang kakilala or ka-close na pwedeng ma-interviews o hirap silang makipag-communicate sa iba para i-ask sila na to create a biography. So, doon pa lang, parang nawawala na sila ng access or resources. Then, another thing, halimbawa naman, yung katulad ng project natin na big book. Hindi po ba nagka-big book project na tayo? So, kung individual siyang gagawin, parang yung iba sa mga kaklase natin is walang masyadong resources na gagamitin. Kumbaga, wala yung mga things na kailangan nila sa bahay nila. So, in that way, mapapagastos sila. Or kung wala sa lugar nila, maaring dumayo pa sila, makabili lang ng ganong gamit na kailangan sa project nila, diba? So, mas nagiging costly siya for the other students. Then third, we have a jumbled letter, and it is portfolio. So portfolio naman is one of the nicest method since it allows instructor to give a real-time feedback from their students. So yung mga feedback na yun is nakakatulong sa mga individuals or sa mga students to improve more. Ano ba yung portfolio? Portfolios are collection of student work representing a selection of performance. A portfolio may be a folder containing a student's best pieces and the student's evaluation of the strengths and weaknesses of the pieces. Siguro familiar naman tayo sa tinatawag natin portfolio, hindi po ba? So, yung portfolio na yon, it can be a snapshot of students' knowledge. So, doon i-compile natin yung mga nagawa ng students which provide evidence of their experiences, mga strengths nila, and their weaknesses. So, ano po ba yung mga example ng portfolio? First example na pwedeng maging theme or context ng portfolio natin, the student can build a portfolio to show the process of a creative project like a novel. So, we can ask our student to make a portfolio about a novel, yung process of good novel. Pwede rin namang example number 2, the student can create a swipe pile of their best artworks and pieces. So, pwede naman natin silang pagawin ng portfolio kung saan nakakompile doon lahat ng kanilang mga best work. Halimbawa kung ang subject natin ay art. So, right from the start ng klase hanggang matapos ng school year, pwede natin ipaipon sa kanila yung mga art na nagawa nila sa mga subjects natin. So, maraming iba't ibang klase ng portfolio. Pwede rin namang a compilation of all the topics na naituro ni teacher, compilation ng mga nagawa niyong reflection, iba't ibang klase ng portfolio, depende sa teachers natin. So, portfolio is pwede rin itong maging way on assessing our student. Kasi, sinabi ko kanina na it can be a compilation. So, doon makikita natin yung mga work na naipon nila from noon until now. So, doon nakakaroon tayo ng idea on how well they improve. So, nakikita natin yung mga pagbabago sa mga nagagawa nila or sa mga works nila. So, ano naman po yung advantages ng portfolio in assessment? First, it helps the instructor to identify any gaps in the student's knowledge and address them on time. So, we can identify gaps by means of reviewing. Siyempre sa pag-review natin, isa-isa natin yung na-analyze yung mga gawa ng students natin. So, from that moment na nire-review natin yung portfolio nila, is nagkakaroon na tayo ngayon ng idea about the students' works or performances. So, doon makikita tayo yung mga gaps. And kung halimbawa na makikita tayo ng isang gaps, one thing to address that is to help them for the next day. So, from day to day, is kailangan natin silang tulungan to fill that gap. Halimbawa, kung may skills silang hindi na-acquire, so, kailangan natin silang tulungan para ma-fill yun. Then, second, it promotes positive feedback and encourages teacher-students communication. So, dito naman nagkakaroon tayo ng positive feedback because of the teacher's compliments, side comments, or yung mga tinatawag natin na yung magbibigay si teacher ng tips kung how to improve, diba? So, Dito, yung communication ni teachers and yung student ang nagiging feedback doon. So, nagko-complement si teachers to the effort of the students in creating the portfolio kasi nakikita ni teacher doon yung development. So, nakikita niya doon yung effort in doing the portfolio. So, it can also build a connection between the students and teacher in a way of na-encourage ni teachers si student to work hard. Diba? Napuboost niya yung confidence ni students kasi nakakarinig siya ng good compliments sa teachers natin. So that na lalaman ni student na na-appreciate ni teacher yung portfolio na ginagawa niya. Then for the disadvantages, it is time-consuming especially when you're dealing with a large class. So, bakit naman siya tinawag na time-consuming? Time-consuming siya kasi we have to check it individually since they have different contexts. And also, need mo mag-provide ng feedback individually. So, di ba may diverse learners tayo. So, may iba't ibang klase tayo ng student. Of course, iba't ibang klase o iba't ibang types din ng portfolio yung magagawa nila. Depende sa students natin. So, kailangan natin yun i-check individually. Kailangan natin magbigay ng feedback individually. And the more students na papagawin mo ng portfolio, of course, the more time na need mo para ma-evaluate or mag-gradean yung kanilang mga gawang portfolio. Napaka-importante doon yung feedback kasi doon natin malalaman in reviewing their portfolios, of course, doon natin ma-assess yung work nila and the performance nila, diba? So, napakalaga para sa student natin yung feedback para malaman nila kung kailangan pa ba nila mag-improve on how well or kung ano ba yung level na kailangan marating nila, diba? Para ma-reach nila yung goal na sinet mo. And for the fourth example of informal assessment, we have observation. So, ano naman po yung observation? A classroom observation is an act of watching a student's performance in their classroom or learning environment. A classroom observation can be as brief as a few minutes or as long as an entire school day or more. So, yung observation is one of the most common methods of informal assessment. So, as the name suggests, observation. So, dito nag-observes lang tayo. It involves paying attention to the student as they learn and then record lang natin yung mga na-notice natin behavioral pattern nila. So, isa din sa important aspect ng observation is we are keeping the records of changes over a period. So, maaring gawin natin ang observation from day to day. Pwede namang weekly, monthly, or per sem. It allows the instructor to compare yung student's performance over the learning period. So, in that way, nade-determine natin or how much progress they made. Diba? Kung halimbawa, kung sa knowledge yung pag-uusapan, observation. So, kung i-observe natin sila from day to day, madedefine na natin kung how much they learn. Kung nagiging ba nila yung knowledge na tinuturo natin sa kanila. Kung sa skills naman, is madedefine natin kung na-adapt ba nila o natututunan ba nila yung mga skills na dapat matutunan nila in that period of time. So, ayun po siya yung observations. Ginagawa natin yung observation to assess the students. So, ano naman po yung examples ng mga observation? Compare students' performance over the learning period and determine how much progress they have made. So, ayun nga po, kina-compare natin yung performance nila in observation. Halimbawa, their performance last week, tsaka yung performance nila this week. Pwede rin naman kung performance nila from the start of the class, mga first month of the class, din yung performance nila habang tumatagal na hanggang sa mag-end na yung school year. So, doon pa lang so, yung range ng mga araw, weeks, or yung month na ginugol natin to observe them, syempre may define natin yung mga pagbabagong nagaganap sa kanila. So, yung mga progress nila. Now, what are the advantages of observation? Observation is one of the simplest methods of assessing students. It doesn't require too many resources from the instructors or the students. So very easy lang to assess the students, diba? Kasi we only have to watch them, to analyze them, to record their performance. So no need na to conduct a survey or exam para ma-assess sila, unlike the formal assessment. Second, it provides reliable data for assessment. Reliable kasi kung anong performance sa pinapakita ng students, of course, ayun din ang i-record ni teacher. So, kung nagulo at medyo mahina si student sa klase, ayun yung kakalabasan ng record mo. So, parang what you see is what you get, parang ganun. So, kung good ang performance mo, of course, good din yung record mo. So, yung observation natin is reliable kasi kung ano yung performance na ginagawa mo in class, of course, ayun yung magiging result ng record mo from the observation. Siyempre, kung may advantages, meron ng disadvantages. Student can adjust their behaviors when they know the instructor is watching, and this alters the quality of data from observation. So, isang advantages din pala na kahit napaka-reliable na ng data na nakakuha natin from what we see from our student, is pwede yun pa rin mag-alter yun sa quality of data ng observation natin in a way na pagbabago or changes of their behavior. So, once nalaman nila or alam na nila kung tuwing kailan ka mag-observe or halimbawa nagkaroon silang idea on your time para mag-observe sa kanila, so, nagbabago yung behavior nila. Kumbaga, dun sila mas nag-e-effort from the observation day kung saan mas ginagalingan nila, pwede namang okay yung behavior nila, mas nagiging active sila from observation day. Pero from normal day is hindi. So, kumbaga magkaiba yung record mo from the observation and from day-to-day or normal class lang. Second, observation is subjective and easily affected by the personal bias of the instructor. So, may chance din ito to consider yung favoritism. So, kapag nagkakonduct tayo ng observation, always remember that we should always be fair. So, kapag nag-observe tayo, as a teacher, kailangan talaga natin iwasan yung tinatawag natin favoritism. Diba? Kasi we have to assess them, evaluate them individually and fairly. So, dapat kung ano yung totoong data, ang reliable evaluation na nakuha natin sa student natin, information, dapat ayun yung sinusunod natin. Para hindi tayo nagiging subject to bias. Kung halimbawa, kung sino lang yung favorite teacher, yung active lang, tapos ayun lang yung gagandahan ng record teacher. So, hindi dapat ganun. Tapos, yung mga students natin na medyo shy, hindi sila active sa school, pero good ang performance nila. So, dapat fair tayo mag-grade or mag-assess sa mga students natin. Now, what the last example, we have oral presentation. Ano naman po yung oral presentation? Oral presentations, also known as public speaking or simply presentation, consists of an individual or group verbally addressing an audience on a particular topic. So, an oral observation can take different forms. So, it can be impromptu presentation or pwede namang specific subject. Ano po ba example ng oral presentation? The teacher calls up a pupil and asks them to recap lesson from a previous class. To make things easier, the instructor might include prompts like, the most important thing I learned is, and second, what I did not like about the class was. So, ito yung mga tinatawag nating oral presentation. Kung saan, pwede itong biglaan. Halimbawa na lang, before mag-start yung discussion, we can ask our student for a recitation or a presentation. Ano ba yung natutunan nila from the last topic? Or ano ba yung mga nalaman nila or alam na nila about the new topic, yung mga prior knowledge nila about the new topic, or pwede namang at the end of the discussion, tatanungan natin si student, ano yung natutunan nila, what is the most important thing they have learned. So, ganun yung mga oral presentation. Pero pwede rin naman oral presentation kung saan nagkakaroon tayo ng preparation. Kumbaga, binibigyan natin enough time mga student natin to prepare at para aralin yung presentation na gagawin nila. Ano naman po yung advantages of oral presentation? So, during oral presentation, teachers can provide immediate feedback to every student. The rest of the class also benefit from this feedback session. It is one of the most effective methods of assessing students. So, since oral nga siya, the comment or the feedback is immediate after the presentation. So, right after na matapos ng student mag-presentation, of course, kasunod na nun is yung feedback ng teacher based sa presentation ng students. So, teacher can provide additional information about the topic. Pwede rin namang side comments for improvements, yung mga questions, clarification, or mga tips na pwedeng idagdag ni teacher. And it can also be helpful to the rest of the class since yung mga information na yon is magbe-benefit din yung iba. So, hindi lang siya sinasabi ng teacher for that one person na nagpe-present, but para rin magamit ng ibang students na nakikinig or yung audience. Second, oral presentations are flexible. You can easily adjust them to suit different context. So, we can adjust them depending on our students that are going to present. Siyempre, kino-consider natin yung presenter as well as the listener. So, it is very flexible and we should be considerate sa mga bagay-bagay para mas maging effective yung tinatawag nating presentation. Diba? Kasi hindi naman natin makukuha yung goals natin o yung pinakagusto natin mangyayari as a result when we are assessing them kung ipipilit natin yung objectives natin. Alam naman natin hindi ma-reach ng mga students natin. So, dapat may mga bagay tayong kino-consider about our students, sa mga presenter, at syempre sa mga listener. Now, what are the disadvantages of oral presentations? If you are dealing with a large class, oral presentations are time-consuming. Time-consuming siya, diba? Kasi we're including the presentation preparation, yung discussion, and yung time na ini-spare natin in a question and answer. Siyempre, kung large class or large number of audience yung makikinig, of course, mas maraming time yung kakailanganin natin para ipaintindi sa kanila yung pinapresent natin. Another thing pa is yung question and answer. Siyempre, may mga clarification pa silang mga itatanong. So, the more people na magtatanong, the more time na kailangan natin i-lend para maging successful yung ating presentation. Second, students and teachers need to invest lots of resources to organize oral presentation successfully. So, dito na pumapasok ang mga learning materials natin, instructional materials, at yun yung mga very important para yung oral presentation natin is mas maging organized, mas understandable, less hassle for the presenter, at syempre, mas comfortable siya na mag-present as well as yung mga listeners na, diba? Hindi sila magdadoubt na makinig or hindi sila magkakaroon na alinlangan na kulang sa gamit or hindi maging effective yung presentation ng presenter. So, this is the last example of informal assessment na pwede natin gawin in the classroom. So, ating recap lang. So, first we have quizzes. Second, we have project. Third, we have portfolio. Fourth, we have observation. And last, we have oral presentation. Okay, now let's proceed to the overall benefits of informal assessment. So, we have 5. 1. it presents a more accurate picture of a learner's ability. So we are not depending on scores, right? But to the actual performances. 2. It takes place in the student's natural learning environment. So it could go with the natural classroom environment, so no need for us to create or to make a testing facilities just to assess the students. 3. It requires less planning and resources to follow up. So informal assessment is very easy to conduct, no planning and less resources needed in assessing students. 4. It sets the stage for immediate and consistent feedback. So the result of a day-to-day observation of the student is very immediate and consistent means. Then the last 5 provide meaningful data since we are gathering accurate information about our students. Okay, to sum up my report, for the conclusion, the goal of informal assessment is to discover the peculiar learning needs of individual students and then create strategies to plug these gaps. Informal assessment methods thrives on two-way feedback. The students get feedback on the performance while the teachers get feedback on their instructional methods and the learning curriculum. So that will be all for my report. Hope you learned something from me and thank you for listening.